The lawyer cleared his throat and said my name like it surprised him. Not with warmth, with hesitation. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. If you've ever had a room decide who you are without asking you first, stay with me. Like the story if it feels familiar. Subscribe if you want to hear what happens when silence stops being polite. I'm telling this now because I didn't then. My name is Naomi Keller, and I was 29 years old when my parents tried to pretend I didn't exist. It happened on a Tuesday morning in Fresno County, inside a beige conference room that smelled faintly of dust and burnt coffee. My grandfather, Walter Keller, had died 6 weeks earlier. He was the man who raised me, the man who taught me how to balance a checkbook before I learned long division, the man who sat in the front row of every school assembly because no one else ever did. I was 10 years old when my parents left me with him. They called it temporary. They always do. My father, Richard Keller, stood across the room now, arms crossed, jaw set. My mother, Elaine Keller, sat beside him, fingers laced tightly around her purse strap like it was keeping her upright. My older brother, Matthew Keller, leaned back in his chair, scrolling on his phone, bored already. They looked like a family. I looked like an administrative error. The attorney, Paul Henley, adjusted his glasses and glanced down at the will again. According to the final amended document, he said, Mr. Walter Keller designated the majority of his liquid assets to his granddaughter. That was me. My mother inhaled sharply, not in grief, in protest. How much? Richard asked. Paul hesitated. That hesitation was my first warning. $2 million, he said. After taxes. The room went quiet. Matthew finally looked up. That can't be right, Elaine said. Her voice was thin, controlled, the same voice she used when correcting waiters. Naomi lived with him. He covered her expenses. That money was supposed to stay in the family. Paul nodded slowly. It is in the family. She turned toward me then, really looked at me, like she was seeing a stranger in her house. That money wasn't meant for you, she said. You're not equipped to handle that kind of responsibility. I didn't answer. I was thinking about the time Walter sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and showed me how compound interest worked. I was 13. He said, learn this now so no one ever tells you you're too young or too stupid to understand money. He had smiled when he said it. Matthew laughed under his breath. She'll burn through it in a year. Richard finally spoke to me directly. We'll manage it for you, he said. That's the sensible thing. You can sign over control. We'll make sure it's protected. There it was. Not concern. Control. I looked at the will again. Walter's signature was steady, deliberate, final. Paul cleared his throat again. Mr. Keller was very clear. Mrs. Naomi Keller receives the inheritance outright. No trust, no restrictions. My mother's lips pressed into a line. Then he was manipulated. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. He wasn't, I said. My voice sounded calm, even to me. He knew exactly what he was doing. Richard stood. This is not a discussion. No, I said quietly. It isn't. That was the first time I refused him. I didn't know it yet, but it was also the first time I took something that was mine and didn't apologize for it. They didn't speak to me after that. Not really. Emails about logistics, texts about paperwork. No questions about how I was doing. No condolences, just irritation. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from my parents' attorney suggesting a family resolution meeting. I didn't go. Instead, I went back to Walter's house. The house was small, 1 story, built in the 70s. Nothing impressive, but it was where I learned who I was. I sat at the same desk where I used to do homework, the same window where Walter used to watch the street at dusk. I opened his old filing cabinet and found exactly what I expected. Notes, receipts, business clippings. Walter had never owned a company, but he had invested carefully. Boring stocks, utility bonds, nothing flashy. He taught me patience by example. At the bottom of the drawer was a folder labeled simply Naomi. Inside were college brochures I'd never applied to because my parents said they were unrealistic. A printout of a startup accelerator application I'd filled out but never submitted because I didn't think I deserved, and a handwritten note. You don't owe them your future. I folded it carefully and put it in my bag. That night, my brother texted me, "You should be careful. People will take advantage of you. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back, I already know. What I didn't tell him was that I had already decided what to do with the money. Not spend it, not hide it, build with it. 6 months later, I incorporated Northline Supply, a logistics software company focused on optimizing regional food distribution for independent growers. Not glamorous, not trendy, but needed. I was 30 by then. I hired slowly, learned obsessively, failed quietly. I didn't tell my family. They wouldn't have understood the point. They thought abandonment had made me small. What it actually did was teach me how to stand alone without collapsing. And they were about to find out what happens when the child you leave behind stops asking for permission. Because the inheritance was never the story. It was the match. And everything after this was fire. Success doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in silence, in mistakes no one sees, in long hours where there's no one to impress and no one watching closely enough to care. That was my life after Walter died. Quiet, focused, unforgiving. I moved out of his house and into a one-bedroom apartment near Clovis, close enough to Fresno to meet farmers face to face, but far enough to breathe. Northline Supply wasn't an idea anymore. It was paperwork, vendor calls, and contracts I barely understood until I read them 3 times. The first person I hired was Jared Owens, a back-end engineer I met through a local coding meetup. He was 34, soft-spoken, and smarter than he let on. When I told him what I was building, he didn't nod politely like everyone else had. He asked questions, specific ones. Who owns the data? He asked. Farmers do, I said. Always. He smiled. I'm in. That was how I learned something important. People who respect your boundaries don't try to move them. The first 6 months were brutal. Northline burned cash. Not recklessly, but steadily. Servers, compliance filings, insurance. I tracked every dollar like it might run away if I didn't. My parents didn't call. They did, however, talk. I heard it from Marilyn Ortega, Walter's neighbor, who stopped me in the grocery store one afternoon. Your mother said you were being reckless, she said gently. That she tried to warn your grandfather. I smiled politely and paid for my groceries. That night, I checked my account balances again. Then again, I still had room. Not for error, for patience. Matthew called 2 weeks later. Mom's worried, he said, like he was reading from a script. You haven't invested the money properly. I've invested it carefully, I replied. In software, he scoffed. That's a gamble. Then stop watching, I said. He laughed. You're going to need help. I hung up. The first contract came from a cooperative outside Modesto. Small, seasonal, barely profitable. But it worked. Our platform reduced spoilage by 12% in 3 months. That was real. Jared stayed late that night. So did I. We should document this, he said. Case studies matter. They do, I replied, but not yet. He tilted his head. Why not? Because I don't want the wrong people paying attention, I said. He didn't ask who I meant. A year in, Northline had 12 clients and 1 problem. Scale. Our system worked beautifully at the local level. It broke when we expanded. Not catastrophically. Quietly. Orders delayed, alerts misfired. Farmers noticed. I didn't sleep for 3 nights. Jared didn't either. We fixed it. Rewrote core logic. Brought in Samantha Liu, a compliance consultant with a sharp eye and no patience for shortcuts. She was 42 and had left a corporate job because she was tired of being ignored. Your biggest risk isn't growth, she told me after reviewing our system. It's visibility. I nodded. I know. And? She asked. I want it, I said. On my terms. That was the first time I said it out loud. By the end of the 2nd year, Northline broke even. My parents found out through a business column in a regional ag publication. My name was mentioned once, the company name twice. Elaine called me the next morning. You should have told us, she said. I didn't need to, I replied. We could have helped, she insisted. You didn't, I said. Silence stretched. This is your grandfather's money, she said finally. You owe him caution. I thought about Walter teaching me how to read contracts, how to walk away from bad deals even when they flattered you. I owe him follow-through, I said. She hung up. The following week, Northline received an acquisition inquiry. Not serious, not insulting. Curious, I declined. Not because it wasn't tempting, because I recognized the tone. The third year was when things changed. We landed a multi-state contract with a regional distributor covering parts of Northern California and Oregon. Revenue jumped. Hiring followed. So did attention. My parents sent a letter that time, handwritten, framed as pride. It arrived the same day Matthew showed up unannounced at my office. "You're doing well," he said, looking around like he was evaluating a purchase. "Better than expected." I didn't offer him a seat. "Why are you here?" I asked. "Family," he said. "We should talk." I crossed my arms. "About what?" He smiled, not kindly. "About how this could work for all of us." That was the moment I understood something that took me too long to learn. They hadn't left me because they didn't care. They left me because they assumed I would never matter. And now that I did, they wanted a seat at the table they never helped build. Matthew leaned closer. "Dad thinks we should formalize things. Structure, oversight." "No," I said. He laughed. "You don't really have a choice." I looked at him then. Really looked. "I always have a choice," I said. "You just didn't notice before." He stood slowly. "We'll see." As he walked out, I felt the shift. Not fear. Clarity. The kind that tells you the next move won't be small. And that the people who taught you abandonment don't like it when you stop being available. That night, I locked the office myself. I knew what was coming, and I wasn't going to step aside this time. The first thing my parents tried to take wasn't the company. It was the story. 2 weeks after Matthew's visit, I started getting calls from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old family friends, former neighbors, distant relatives who suddenly remembered my birthday. They all asked the same question, dressed up differently. "So, how's the business really going?" Not congratulations. Not curiosity. Verification. I heard my mother's voice in every pause. I didn't correct them. I didn't defend myself. I answered plainly and briefly, the way Walter taught me. "It's stable," I said. "We're working." Stability unnerves people who rely on chaos to justify interference. The next move came through paperwork. One morning, Samantha Lou knocked on my office door, holding a thin envelope. Her expression was controlled, but her jaw was tight. "You need to see this," she said. Inside was a formal notice from a regional bank, a request for confirmation of ownership structure, accompanied by an inquiry about potential family claims tied to the original capital source. I didn't have to read between the lines. Richard Keller had made calls. "They're implying the inheritance creates shared interest," Samantha said. "It doesn't. But they're testing." "Testing what?" I asked. "Whether you'll fold," she replied. I didn't. We responded with documentation. Walter's will, probate closure, corporate filings, every line clean, every signature final. The bank withdrew the inquiry within 48 hours. That should have ended it. It didn't. My parents invited me to Thanksgiving. The invitation arrived by email. Subject line: "Family is still family." No apology, no acknowledgement, just an assumption that time had softened the edges enough for them to step back in. I almost didn't go. Almost. But something in me wanted to see it. Not for closure, for calibration. Thanksgiving at my parents' house in Bakersfield looked exactly as it always had. Same table, same centerpieces, same quiet hierarchy of who spoke and who waited. Matthew was already there when I arrived. He hugged me like we were close. Too close. My mother smiled too quickly. My father nodded once, like he was approving a decision he'd already made. Dinner passed politely. They talked about everything except my work. Then dessert came. Richard cleared his throat. "We've been talking," he said, "about legacy." There it was. Matthew leaned forward. "Northline has potential," he said, "but it's exposed. You don't have a board, no oversight, no family structure." "I have governance," I replied calmly, "just not blood-based." Elaine sighed. "You've always been defensive." "I've always been observant," I said. Richard folded his hands. "We're offering support." I looked at him. "You're offering control." Silence dropped over the table. Matthew laughed. "You make everything sound so dramatic." I met his eyes. "You make everything sound so harmless." My mother pushed her plate away. Walter would have wanted us involved. I felt something steady rise in my chest. Not anger, Alignment. No, I said. He wanted me prepared. Richard's voice hardened. You wouldn't have anything without him. That's true, I replied. But you wouldn't either. Matthew stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. We're trying to help. No, I said quietly. You're trying to re-enter without accountability. The word landed. My father stared at me, like he was seeing someone unfamiliar. Someone unmanageable. Careful, he said. You don't want to alienate family. I stood. I learned how to survive without you, I said. Alienation isn't a threat. I left before coffee. 2 days later, the call came from Darren Whitlow, a consultant I'd met briefly at a regional ag-tech conference months earlier. I got a strange inquiry, he said. Someone claiming to represent your interests. My grip tightened on the phone. Who? Your brother, he replied. He asked if I'd consider advising the company during a transition. What transition? I asked. Darren paused. That's what I wanted to clarify. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called Samantha. They're moving, I said. Yes, she replied. And now we do too. That afternoon, I brought in Mark Ellison, a corporate attorney based in Sacramento with a reputation for being unflinching. He reviewed everything: the inheritance, the incorporation, the operating agreements. He leaned back in his chair after 2 hours. They can't touch your company, he said, but they can make noise. How loud? I asked. Loud enough to scare partners, he replied. If you let them. I didn't. We drafted cease and desist letters. Narrow, professional, directed specifically at misrepresentation of authority. Matthew received his first. So did Richard. The response wasn't legal. It was personal. My mother showed up at my office unannounced. She stood in the lobby like she belonged there. I didn't raise you to treat family like adversaries, she said when I stepped outside. You didn't raise me, I replied. Her face tightened. We made choices. Yes, I said. And now so am I. She lowered her voice. You're going to regret this. I studied her carefully. The woman who left me behind because it was inconvenient to fight for me. No, I said. I already survived it. She left without another word. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and opened Walter's old notebook. The one with his careful handwriting and clipped articles. On the last page, there was a sentence I'd never noticed before. When people show up late, check what they want before you offer them a chair. I closed the notebook. Northline wasn't just a company anymore. It was a boundary, and the people who had ignored me my entire childhood were about to learn what happens when you mistake distance for weakness. Because the next move wouldn't be quiet, and it wouldn't be emotional. It would be decisive. The noise didn't start with threats. It started with concern. Emails phrased as worry. Phone calls framed as checking in. People I did business with asking questions that sounded innocent until they stacked on top of each other. Is everything okay with your ownership? Someone mentioned a family dispute. Do you have backing if things get complicated? Complicated was doing a lot of work. I sat in my office after the third call and stared at the whiteboard where we tracked deployments. Every marker line was real. Every delay accounted for. Nothing was complicated, except the people who wanted it to be. I called Samantha Liu. They're seeding doubt, I said. Yes, she replied. And they're doing it socially, not legally. How do we stop it? We don't chase rumors, she said. We outgrow them. That was easy to say. Harder to execute when the rumors wore my last name. The first real hit landed a week later. A mid-sized distributor in Southern California postponed a contract review. Not canceled, postponed. The email was polite but vague. They wanted to wait for clarity. Clarity about what, exactly, they didn't say. I knew. Matthew had found a pressure point. I didn't call the distributor. I didn't reassure them. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I flew to Salinas to meet with a growers collective we'd been piloting with for months. No press, no announcements, just work. We signed a performance-based agreement on the spot. Lower upfront fees, higher back-end returns if we delivered. I was betting on execution. They were betting on me. By the time I got back, Jared had left a note on my desk. We just crossed 10,000 active shipments this month. I smiled once, then got back to work. The next escalation came wrapped in family tradition. My parents were hosting a retirement dinner for my uncle, Thomas Keller, at a country club in Visalia. Invitations went out to half the extended family, and a good number of local business owners. Mine arrived last. Elaine called the night before. "It would mean a lot if you came," she said. "People have been asking." "About what?" I asked. "About you," she said. "There's been confusion." "Confusion again." "I'll come," I said. She exhaled in relief. "Good. Let's keep things civil." I arrived alone. The room was warm and loud, full of overlapping conversations and polished smiles. Matthew spotted me immediately. So did my father. They didn't approach. They waited. When I went to the bar, Dennis Rourke, a regional supplier I'd spoken with once, leaned over. "Didn't realize your family was so involved," he said lightly. "Involved how?" I asked. He hesitated. "They seem concerned about continuity." I nodded. "They always are, when they don't control it." He blinked. "I didn't mean—" "I know," I said. "You meant what you heard." That was when my father chose to speak. He tapped his glass with a spoon. The room quieted. He made a speech about legacy, about sacrifice, about family businesses that survive because everyone pulls together. Then he smiled at me. "Naomi has done impressive things," he said, "but she's always been independent, sometimes to her own detriment." A few people chuckled politely. "She'll learn," he added. "We all do." I felt the room tilt, not dramatically, subtly, the kind of humiliation that pretends it's guidance. I stood. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying farther than I expected, "I learned early." Heads turned. I learned what happens when people decide what's best for you without asking. I learned how to build without support. And I learned that independence isn't a phase. Silence. Matthew shifted uncomfortably. "I'm proud of my work," I continued, "and I'm clear on who's responsible for it." I looked directly at my father. "That's me." No applause. No confrontation. Just a recalibration. I left before dessert. The fallout came fast. 2 clients requested updated assurances. 1 potential partner paused talks indefinitely. Matthew sent a text that night. "You embarrassed Dad." I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the text to Mark Ellison. "We're past warnings," I said when he called. "What's next?" "Documentation," he replied. "And distance." The next morning, Mark filed a formal notice with the Secretary of State, clarifying Northline's ownership, governance, and decision authority. Public. Unambiguous. Boring. That afternoon, Samantha scheduled a call with our top 5 clients. No drama, just facts. Jared watched me pace before the call. "They're trying to make you react," he said. "I know," I replied. "That's why I won't." The call went well. Better than well. 1 client thanked me for the transparency. Another asked about expanding scope. By the end of the week, the postponed distributor came back. Quietly. Like nothing had happened. Matthew showed up again that Friday. This time, he brought my father. They stood in the lobby together, united, familiar. Security called upstairs. I told them to wait. I finished my meeting first. When I finally came down, my father spoke before I could. "This has gone too far," he said. "You're damaging the family name." I looked at him. "You didn't protect it when it mattered," I said. "You're just noticing now because it's visible." Matthew scoffed. "You think this ends well for you?" "It already has," I replied. My father stepped closer. "You think a little software company makes you untouchable?" I smiled slightly. "No. Clear boundaries do." They left without another word. That night, I opened Walter's notebook again. Another line, underlined twice. "People who fear losing relevance will always call your independence a mistake." I closed the notebook and turned off the light. The next move wouldn't come from them. It would come from the one place they hadn't expected me to prepare. And when it did, they wouldn't be able to talk their way around it anymore. Control doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives disguised as paperwork you didn't request, decisions made on your behalf, doors you didn't realize could be locked until they were. The first sign came on a Monday morning. Jared Owens stood in my doorway, holding his laptop like it had betrayed him. "I can't access the deployment dashboard," he said. "Permissions error." "That doesn't make sense," I replied. "You're admin." "I was," he said. I felt it then. A tightening behind my eyes. Not panic. Recognition. "Samantha," I said, already reaching for my phone. She answered on the first ring. "I was just about to call you." "Say it," I said. There's been an attempt to file a notice of interest against Northline's assets, she said. Not valid, but disruptive. By who? Your parents' attorney, she replied. On behalf of Matthew Keller. I closed my eyes once, opened them. What does it affect? I asked. Bank access reviews, vendor confidence, internal permissions if IT vendors get spooked, she said. Nothing permanent. Unless you hesitate. I didn't. Within an hour, Mark Ellison was on a secure call with our bank, our hosting provider, and our primary insurer. Calm. Surgical. Unimpressed. They're asserting moral claim, not legal standing, he said afterward. It's noise. But it's targeted noise. Targeted how? I asked. At momentum, he replied. They don't want to own it. They want to slow it. That afternoon, I called an all-hands meeting. Not to explain, to align. I stood in front of 23 people who trusted me with their paychecks, their time, their belief that this work mattered. There's an external attempt to create confusion, I said. It won't change our operations. It won't change leadership. If anyone contacts you claiming authority here that isn't me, you send them to legal. No discussion. No one asked questions. That was the moment I understood what real leadership felt like. Quiet consent. By Wednesday, my parents escalated again. They didn't call me. They called my grandfather's church. Walter had been a fixture there for decades. Quiet donor. Occasional volunteer. The kind of man people remembered without trying to. Elaine spoke to the pastor, framed it as concern. She's under a lot of pressure, she said, according to Pastor James Holloway, who called me that evening. We're worried she's being taken advantage of. Taken advantage of. By whom, exactly? She didn't say. I wanted you to hear it from me, James said gently, before it became a narrative. I thanked him. Then I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the counter where Walter used to drink his coffee. They were widening the circle now, trying to make me small through implication. I didn't respond publicly. Instead, I scheduled a meeting with Lena Park, a regional investment advisor who specialized in minority-owned supply chains. We'd spoken once at a conference. She was sharp, direct. You're bleeding time, she said after reviewing our numbers. But you're positioned. For what? I asked. For leverage, she replied. If you want it. I did. Within a month, Northline secured a strategic partnership with a West Coast cooperative network. Not an acquisition, not a merger, a framework. Shared infrastructure. Independent governance. Visibility without surrender. When the announcement went out, my phone lit up. Matthew called 3 times. Elaine left a voicemail that started with concern and ended with accusation. Richard sent a single email. This isn't what your grandfather wanted. I didn't answer. Instead, I wrote a letter. Not to them. To myself. I wrote down every moment I'd been told to wait. To be patient. To not cause friction. To be grateful for scraps framed as protection. I wrote until my hand cramped. Then I folded the letter and put it in Walter's notebook. The public confrontation came a week later. A local business journal hosted a panel on regional supply chains. I was invited as a founder. So was my father. No one told me that part. We sat on the same stage, 3 chairs apart. The moderator introduced him first. Long career, established name. Then me. Younger perspective, she said. New energy. My father smiled like that proved something. Halfway through, he leaned toward the microphone. Family businesses succeed when experience guides innovation, he said. Without that balance, risk increases. I met his gaze. When experience becomes entitlement, I said calmly, it stops being guidance. The room stilled. This company wasn't inherited, I continued. It was built, and the difference matters. After the panel, people approached me quietly. Handshakes, cards, interest. My father didn't look at me. That night, Matthew sent one last message. You're forcing our hand. I stared at the screen. Then I replied, you already did. If this story feels familiar, if you've ever been told to stay small so others could stay comfortable, pause here. Like the video, subscribe. What comes next isn't loud, but it's irreversible. The next morning, Mark called. They filed a petition, he said, claiming undue influence over the inheritance. I smiled once. Good, I said. Now it's on record. Because quiet attacks thrive in shadow. And I had spent years preparing for daylight. The petition landed like a stone dropped into still water. No splash, no announcement. Just ripples that traveled farther than they should have. Mark Ellison called it strategic harassment, a civil filing alleging undue influence, emotional dependency, and impaired judgment at the time of the inheritance. The language was careful, sanitized, designed to sound like concern instead of accusation. It won't hold, Mark said, but it will demand response. That was the point. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to exhaust me. The filing was assigned to Judge Caroline Mendel, Fresno County Superior Court, known for patience, known for reading everything, known for not tolerating theatrics. I appreciated that more than I expected. The first hearing was procedural. Motions, deadlines, a calendar set for discovery. My parents sat behind their attorney, Gregory Haynes, a man with a polished smile and a voice that never quite rose above conversational volume. Matthew sat between them, hands clasped, eyes forward. He looked prepared, rehearsed. I didn't sit with Mark. I sat alone. Not to make a point, because it felt honest. Gregory spoke first, framed the case as protection, claimed my grandfather had been isolated, influenced, that I had benefited disproportionately due to emotional leverage. Judge Mendel listened without interrupting. Then Mark stood. He didn't argue emotion. He argued records, medical evaluations, financial statements, independent witnesses, letters written in Walter's handwriting that predated any diagnosis they implied. He ended with one sentence. This petition assumes incompetence where there is none, and malice where there is simply autonomy. The judge nodded once. Discovery proceeds, she said, strictly. My mother looked at me then, not angry, not sad, calculate. Discovery was invasive by design. Emails, texts, bank transfers, calendars, notes, anything that could be framed as influence. Mark warned me. They'll try to make you justify your adulthood. I won't, I said. Good, he replied. We'll let the paper speak. And it did. Weeks passed, then months. Every claim they raised collapsed under its own weight. Walter's medical records showed clarity, independence, no cognitive decline. His attorney, Helen Moore, submitted a sworn statement describing his insistence that the will remain unchanged despite pressure from family. Pressure documented from them. The irony was clean. Still, the process took its toll. Not financially, emotionally. I learned what it felt like to have your life dissected by people who never bothered to understand it while it was happening. At Northline, I kept things moving. Samantha handled compliance. Jared scaled infrastructure. Lena guided partnership expansion. The company grew quietly, almost stubbornly. Clients didn't care about my family. They cared about delivery. That steadiness became my anchor. One afternoon, while reviewing deposition summaries, I found something unexpected. An email chain between Matthew and Gregory, dated 3 days before the petition was filed. Matthew wrote, "If we can't control the company, we need to control the capital." Gregory responded, "Undermining the inheritance creates leverage." I stared at the screen. Mark leaned back in his chair when I showed him. "This," he said slowly, "changes the tone." "How?" I asked. "It establishes intent," he replied, "not concern. Strategy." We submitted it. Gregory objected, claimed context, claimed misinterpretation. Judge Mendel requested clarification. Matthew was called for deposition. He arrived confident, casual, dismissive. He didn't expect to be read his own words. Under oath. "Did you write this?" Mark asked, sliding the document across the table. Matthew glanced at it, smiled. "Looks like my email." "And what did you mean by control the capital?" Mark asked. Matthew shrugged. "Family strategy." "And undermining the inheritance?" Mark pressed. Matthew hesitated. "Just long enough." "I meant reviewing it," he said. Mark nodded. "You understand that review implies doubt. Doubt implies invalidity. Invalidity implies revocation." Matthew shifted. "That wasn't my intent," he said. Mark didn't raise his voice. "Then why didn't you pursue mediation?" he asked. Silence. The deposition ended early. That evening, my mother called. Her voice sounded tired, older. "This has gone too far," she said. "It went too far when you filed," I replied. We're trying to protect what's left, she said. Of what? I asked. Of family, she whispered. I thought about Walter's house. The quiet, the notebooks, the way family had looked when it showed up consistently. You're trying to protect access, I said, not connection. She didn't deny it. The next hearing arrived without drama. Judge Mendel ruled the petition unfounded, dismissed with prejudice. She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at Gregory. This court does not entertain litigation as leverage, she said, particularly when the record demonstrates the opposite of the claim. My parents didn't react. Matthew stared straight ahead. Outside the courtroom, Gregory approached Mark, spoke quietly, professional. This didn't need to get ugly, he said. Mark nodded. Then it shouldn't have. They left without looking at me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt complete. The following week, I received a letter from Helen Moore, Walter's attorney. Written before he passed, sealed to be delivered only if the will was challenged. Inside was a single paragraph. If they question my clarity, let the record show I trusted Naomi because she never asked for what she hadn't earned. I folded it carefully. Northline crossed a revenue milestone that quarter. No announcement, no celebration, just forward motion. And something else shifted. The calls stopped. The questions faded. People realized there was nothing left to extract. Distance settled where entitlement once lived. That night, I sat alone again with Walter's notebook. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was protecting anything. I was building. And the people who had mistaken my patience for permission were finally out of moves. What came next wouldn't be legal. It would be personal, and they wouldn't be ready for it. Silence followed the dismissal, like a held breath. Not relief, not peace. Assessment. For the first time since Walter died, my parents stopped moving. No filings, no intermediaries, no rumors delivered through polite voices pretending neutrality. They were waiting. I recognized it because I'd lived inside it as a child. The pause before punishment. The quiet recalibration where they decided which lever still worked. Northline didn't slow. If anything, the absence of interference sharpened everything. Decisions came faster. Teams trusted instinct again. I noticed how much energy had been wasted bracing for disruption instead of building. That awareness stayed with me. One Tuesday morning, Samantha walked into my office holding a tablet instead of a folder. That alone told me this wasn't legal. On the screen was a press release draft, not published yet, circulating internally at a regional holding company. The headline wasn't subtle. Keller Family Legacy enters new era with strategic realignment. I scanned the text once, then again. It mentioned Northline Supply, not as an owned entity, as an asset expected to transition into family stewardship following resolution of internal matters. As if the court ruling were a delay, not an ending. Yes, Samantha replied. They want the market to assume inevitability. Who's behind it? I asked. She didn't hesitate. Your father. That afternoon, I called Lena Park. I need leverage that doesn't look like retaliation, I said. She smiled on the other end of the line. I could hear it. Good, because retaliation is inefficient. What do you suggest? I asked. Visibility, she replied. On your terms. Not theirs. 2 days later, Northline announced a new initiative. Not expansion, not profit, transparency. We published our governance framework publicly. Ownership structure, decision authority, ethical commitments, succession planning. Clear language, no ambiguity. We didn't mention family. We didn't need to. The response was immediate. Clients appreciated it. Partners shared it. A trade publication asked to feature it as a model for founder-led companies. My father's draft press release disappeared, but Matthew didn't. He showed up where I didn't expect him to. At Walter's house. The realtor called me directly. There's someone here claiming family authority, she said. He's asking questions about the property. I drove there without rushing. Matthew stood in the driveway, hands in his pockets, looking smaller than he ever had. You don't own this house, I said before he could speak. He shrugged. I wanted to see it. You wanted to be seen seeing it, I replied. He laughed weakly. You always think everything's a move. It is, I said. With you. He stepped closer. Dad's furious. I know, I said. He says you humiliated him, Matthew continued. Publicly. I corrected the record, I replied. Publicly. You didn't have to go that far, he said. I looked at him carefully. The brother who never visited, never called, never asked what it was like to be left behind. I went exactly far enough, I said. His voice sharpened. You think this makes you powerful? No, I replied. It makes me done. That landed harder than anger would have. You always needed him, Matthew said suddenly. Walter, that house, the money. I nodded once. Yes, he blinked. That's it? Yes, I said. I needed someone to stay. He looked away. You didn't, he said quietly. You just wanted to be chosen. I felt the old reflex rise. The urge to explain, to justify. I didn't. I was, I said. Just not by you. He left without another word. That night, I didn't open the notebook. I didn't need to. The next escalation came through a mutual acquaintance. A woman named Denise Rourke, board adjacent in a local investment circle, asked me to coffee. I want to be transparent, she said once we sat. Your father's been asking questions about your liquidity. I smiled politely. Of course he has. He's telling people you're overextended, she continued, that if something shifts, you'll need support. Support meaning? I asked. Capital with strings, she replied. I nodded. Thank you for telling me. Are you worried? She asked. No, I said. I'm prepared. That preparation wasn't financial. It was structural. 2 years earlier, I'd quietly restructured Northline's capital stack. Conservative. Boring. No leverage that could be pulled externally. No single point of pressure. Walter had taught me that, too. Never build something that can be taken with one hand. The following week, I received an invitation. A family mediation session. Voluntary. Framed as reconciliation. Elaine had signed it herself. I didn't respond. Instead, I wrote a letter. Not emotional, not accusatory, clear. I declined mediation, declined shared governance, declined any further discussion regarding Northline, the inheritance, or Walter's estate. I closed with one sentence. Future contact will be limited to matters not involving control, money, or narrative. Mark reviewed it, nodded once, sent it certified. That should have been the end. It wasn't. Because when people lose access, they try exposure. And the story they told next wasn't about money. It was about me. And they thought shame would do what law couldn't. They were wrong. But I wouldn't know how wrong they were until the invitation arrived that changed everything. Not from them. From a place they never expected me to stand. And when I did, there would be no misunderstanding left, only consequences. The invitation arrived in my inbox at 6:14 a.m. Subject line, Women Who Build Summit Keynote Confirmation. I read it twice before it registered. The summit was hosted in San Jose, backed by a coalition of regional accelerators, credit unions, and public-private development funds. Not flashy, credible. The kind of event that didn't chase headlines, but shaped rooms where decisions were quietly made. They wanted me to open the conference. I hadn't applied. I hadn't pitched. Someone had been watching. I accepted without ceremony. 2 hours later, my mother called. I didn't answer. By noon, Samantha forwarded me a message she'd intercepted through a partner. Your father is telling people you're unstable under pressure, that the lawsuit rattled you, that speaking publicly is a mistake. I read it once, deleted it. That was the pattern, wasn't it? When control failed, they reached for characterization. If they couldn't own the asset, they would question the operator. I didn't change my talk. I didn't add disclaimers or soften edges. The keynote wasn't about family. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about success. It was about structure. I spoke about what it takes to build systems that don't collapse when personalities disappoint you. About designing companies that assume human failure without being governed by it. About how independence isn't rebellion, it's risk management. I didn't name my parents. I didn't have to. The room listened. Afterward, 3 people approached me separately with the same question phrased 3 different ways. How did you keep control? I answered each the same. I didn't give it away. The article came out 2 days later. A profile, balanced, thoughtful, focused on Northline's growth and governance philosophy. It quoted me once. I don't confuse family proximity with operational trust. That sentence traveled. Matthew called that night. You're doing interviews now? he asked, voice tight. I spoke at a conference, I replied. You're painting us as villains, he said. I didn't mention you, I replied. You didn't have to, he snapped. I waited. That's the problem, he continued. People are filling in the blanks. Yes, I said calmly. They usually do. He lowered his voice. Dad says this is a line. I know, I said, and you're crossing it. No, I replied. I'm standing on the other side of. He hung up. The next move came faster than I expected. An anonymous email landed in my general inquiries inbox. No greeting, no signature. People should know how you really got that money. Attached was a scanned letter, a distorted version of Walter's handwriting. Altered, sloppy, claiming regret, doubt, pressure. It would have convinced someone who wanted to believe it. I forwarded it to Mark and Helen Moore immediately. Helen called within minutes. That's a forgery, she said flatly. I thought so, I replied. The original is in my safe, she continued. This won't stand, but it will circulate, I said. Yes, she replied, which means it's time. For what? I asked. For the truth, she said. Fully, publicly, on record. The next day, Mark filed a motion, not defensive, declaratory. We requested the court formally affirm the validity of the will, accompanied by sworn testimony from Helen, medical affidavits, and handwriting analysis. We included the forged document as evidence of malicious interference. Judge Mendel scheduled an emergency hearing. The courtroom was fuller this time. Word had spread. My parents arrived together. Matthew followed behind them. He wouldn't look at me. Gregory Haynes looked strained, less polished. Mark spoke first. This court dismissed the original petition, he said. What brings us back today is evidence of continued interference, including attempted fraud. The forged letter was entered into record, Helen testified. Calm, precise. This is not Mr. Walter Keller's writing, she said, and he never expressed doubt about his decision. Quite the opposite. The handwriting expert confirmed it. Judge Mendel turned to Gregory. Do you wish to explain how this document came into circulation? She asked. Gregory hesitated. Matthew's jaw clenched. Elaine's hands shook. We're not alleging authorship, Gregory said carefully. Only concern. Judge Mendel's voice cooled. Concern does not fabricate evidence, she said, nor does it excuse those who distribute it. She looked directly at my parents. This court will not be used to legitimize personal vendettas. The ruling was swift. Cease all interference. Written acknowledgement of will validity. Warning of sanctions if contact continued. Public record. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. I didn't stop. I walked past them without comment, because the story wasn't about spectacle. It was about consequence. That night, my phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts. The silence felt different now, not threatening. Conclusive. I sat on the floor of my apartment, with Walter's notebook open for the last time. I didn't read it. I closed it. The next chapter of this wouldn't involve defending what was already mine. It would involve deciding what kind of distance permanence requires, and whether forgiveness has anything to do with access. Because what comes after truth is choice, and I was finally free to make one. Distance is not absence, it's structure. The weeks after the hearing settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar in its steadiness. No emails asking for clarification, no calls framed as concern, no rumors arriving through friendly mouths. The court order had done what emotions never could. It ended the conversation. At Northline, work deepened. Not faster, cleaner. We finalized a statewide rollout with the cooperative network and signed a data sharing agreement that had taken a year to earn. Jared joked that the codebase felt lighter, like it wasn't bracing for impact anymore. He wasn't wrong. One afternoon, Samantha closed my office door and sat without her usual stack of notes. You should know, she said. People are recalibrating. In what way? I asked. They're treating you like a permanent factor, she replied, not a situation. That distinction mattered. Permanent factors don't get managed. They get respected. The first sign came from the distributor, who'd postponed months earlier. They returned with revised terms. Better margins, longer horizon, no conditions. Clarity helps, their VP said on the call. We like knowing who decides. After we hung up, I stared at the wall longer than necessary. Not out of relief, out of recognition. This was what stability felt like when it wasn't borrowed. Then the invitation arrived. My parents were hosting a memorial dinner for Walter. Not a service, not a public remembrance, a private gathering, family only. The email was brief, polite, almost formal. Matthew wasn't listed as a sender. My mother, Elaine Keller, had signed it herself. I didn't respond right away. I read it once. Then again. There was no apology, no explanation. Just an assumption that time had done what accountability hadn't. I asked Mark what attending might imply. Legally, he said, nothing. Personally, that's yours to decide. Except the light. It still fell the same way, through the kitchen window at dusk. I decided to go, not to reconcile, to observe. The dinner was held at my parents' home in Bakersfield, the same house where I'd learned early how to be quiet without being invisible. The table was set carefully, candles, linen, the performance of respect. My father, Richard Keller, greeted me at the door with a nod. No hug, no hostility. Matthew stood near the window. He didn't move. Elaine gestured for us to sit. Dinner passed with stories about Walter that sounded rehearsed. Safe memories. Edited ones. No mention of how he'd raised me. No acknowledgement of why. When dessert arrived, Elaine finally looked at me. We wanted to honor him, she said. Together. I nodded. You did. Richard cleared his throat. This doesn't have to stay broken. I met his gaze. What is this? Our family, he said. I considered the question. Carefully. Our family, I replied, exists. What you're asking about is access. Matthew shifted. You don't have to make everything transactional. I don't, I said. I make it accurate. Elaine's eyes filled. Not with tears, with frustration. We did what we thought was best, she said. We didn't know how to handle you. You didn't try, I said quietly. The room held its breath. Richard leaned forward. We're willing to move past the legal mess. Start fresh. I nodded once. On what terms? He hesitated. That told me everything. Terms don't matter, he said finally. We're family, I stood. Then here are mine, I said calmly. No involvement in my business. No commentary on my choices. No narrative shared without my consent. We meet as people, not as leverage. Matthew scoffed. That's not a relationship. It is, I replied. Just not one that benefits you. Elaine stood too. You're punishing us. I looked at her. Really looked. No, I said. I'm ending the punishment that never stopped. I left before coffee. In the car, my hands didn't shake. That surprised me. The next morning, an article ran about the summit keynote. It quoted a line I barely remembered saying. Boundaries are not walls. They're doors with conditions. The comments were thoughtful, shared widely, quietly affirming. If this story resonates, if you've ever had to choose between peace and permission, pause here. Like this video. Subscribe if you want to keep walking forward with me. And if you're willing, leave a comment about the boundary that changed your life. That afternoon, Mark called with an update. Your parents' attorney requested a call, he said. For what? I asked. To discuss finality, he replied. I laughed once. Softly. They had their chance, I said. We declined. Weeks passed. The house sold. The proceeds went where the will directed. Clean, uncontested, finished. Matthew sent one last message. I didn't think you'd really walk away. I typed back one sentence. I walked forward. At Northline, we closed the year stronger than projected. Not explosive, sustainable. The kind of growth that doesn't attract predators. On the last Friday before the holidays, I stayed late. Sat alone in the office and watched the city dim into evening. I thought about the version of myself who believed being chosen was the same as being loved. She'd done her best, but she didn't run this life anymore. The final reckoning wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. And it belonged to me. Because when you stop waiting to be claimed, you realize something simple and irreversible. You were never lost. You were left. And surviving that teaches you exactly how to build a future no one can take. The strange thing about winning is how little it announces itself. There was no final call. No apology dressed as closure. No sudden realization delivered by the people who had spent years misunderstanding me. Life didn't circle back to offer symmetry. It moved forward and expected me to keep up. Northline entered the fourth quarter with a kind of stability that only shows up after pressure tests you didn't volunteer for. We onboarded 3 new regional partners in the Midwest, expanded our compliance framework to cover cross-state reporting, and quietly retired a feature that no longer served growers the way it should have. The work was focused, adult, unemotional. That was new. I didn't realize how much of my energy had been spent managing reactions until there was nothing left to manage. One morning, Lena Park sent me a short note. "You've crossed into a different category now. Be intentional." I asked her what she meant. "People will stop asking if you're capable," she replied. "They'll start asking what you allow." That stayed with me. The first test came from an unexpected place. A venture fund out of Chicago requested a meeting. Not an investment pitch, a partnership conversation. They'd been watching Northline's model and wanted to replicate parts of it nationally. "We're interested in your leadership," their managing director, Paul Redding, said during our call. "Not just the product." I listened, asked questions, took notes. Then he said it. "We'd want a seat on the board." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I thought about Thanksgiving, about the panel, about my father's voice describing experience as guidance when it really meant override. "No," I said calmly. Paul blinked. "I'm sorry?" "We don't offer board seats," I said. "We collaborate without governance exchange." "That's unusual," he said. "So is being left behind at 10, I replied, without explaining. We still made it work. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, evaluative. "Then we'll revisit structure," he said, "because what you've built is worth adapting to." After the call, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt aligned. That afternoon, Samantha handed me a printed envelope that had arrived by certified mail. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting. Elaine Keller. Inside was a single page. "I'm trying to understand how we got here. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm listening now." I read it once. Then I folded it and put it in a drawer. Listening, I'd learned, doesn't require response to be real. A week later, Matthew emailed. Not a demand, not a complaint. An observation. "Dad's health isn't great. He doesn't talk about you, but he watches everything." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back, "I hope he finds peace." Nothing more. At Northline, we finalized year-end reviews, promotions, bonuses, clear paths forward. I made a point of explaining decisions in full sentences, not summaries. People deserve to know why they mattered. Jared stayed late one evening to help me prep a board update. "You're different," he said casually, not looking up from his laptop. "Better or worse?" I asked. "Clearer," he replied. "Like you stopped waiting for someone to interrupt." I smiled. I did. The last public appearance of the year came without ceremony. A local awards dinner. Northline was recognized for innovation in regional logistics. I accepted the plaque, said thank you, and went home. No speeches about resilience, no lessons delivered for effect, just acknowledgement. On the drive back, I passed the exit that led to my parents' neighborhood. I didn't slow down. Not out of spite, out of certainty. That night, I dreamed about Walter. Not vividly, not symbolically. Just him, sitting at the kitchen table, reading the paper, the way he used to. When I woke up, I wasn't sad. I felt complete. The final meeting of the year was internal, leadership only. No slides, no performance. I told them one thing: we don't build to prove anything. We build to sustain what matters. They nodded. Understood. As people filtered out, Samantha lingered. "You know this isn't over for them," she said gently. "I know," I replied. "But it is for me." She smiled. That's usually how it works. On the last day before the holiday break, I sat alone in the office again. The city was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from shared pause, not avoidance. I thought about the girl who believed being chosen was the same as being safe, who learned early how to disappear without leaving. She didn't fail. She adapted, but I did. The ending wouldn't be dramatic. No final confrontation, no karmic spectacle. Just a life built without explanation. And that, I realized, was the part they could never take. Because when you stop asking to be included, you discover something steady and unmovable. You were already whole. The last chapter wouldn't be about them. It would be about what comes after survival, and how choosing yourself, fully and without apology, quietly changes everything. Healing doesn't announce itself either. It arrives sideways, disguised as boredom, as space where urgency used to live. It took me weeks to realize that the absence of crisis was not a lull before the next blow. It was the result. I noticed it first in my mornings. I stopped checking my phone before coffee, stopped scanning emails for subtext. Decisions arrived cleanly now, without the residue of family interpretation clinging to them. At Northline, we began planning the next 18 months instead of the next quarter. It felt indulgent at first, then responsible. One afternoon, I met with Dr. Renee Alvarez, a supply chain economist from Stanford, who had consulted briefly during our Midwest expansion. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe near the office. "You don't operate like someone who expects rescue," she said after reviewing our projections. "I never have," I replied. She studied me. "That's not common." "No," I said. "It's learned." She nodded once. Respect without curiosity. I liked that. That evening, I received another message from my mother. Not a letter this time, an email. Short. "I'm going to therapy. I don't expect this to change anything. I just wanted you to know." I didn't respond, but I didn't delete it either. Progress, I'd learned, doesn't require participation to be real. The true test arrived quietly, without warning. A routine audit flagged a discrepancy. Minor, correctable. But it triggered a mandatory review from a state agency overseeing data compliance. Standard procedure. The kind of thing that happens when you grow. Mark called it administrative friction. My father would have called it opportunity. I handled it without escalation, provided documentation, corrected the issue, closed the loop. No panic, no blame, just response. That was when it hit me. This was the moment they would have exploited before, and now there was nothing for them to touch. The realization didn't feel triumphant. It felt empty, in the best way. Later that week, Matthew showed up again, not at my office, at my apartment. I didn't open the door right away. I looked through the peephole. He looked thinner, older. I opened it. "I won't stay long," he said immediately. I stepped aside. He didn't sit. "I'm moving," he said. "Out of state." I nodded. "Okay." He shifted his weight. "I wanted to tell you myself." "Thank you," I said. Silence stretched. "I didn't think you'd actually cut us off," he said finally. "I didn't cut you off," I replied. I stepped away. He frowned. "That feels like the same thing." "It isn't," I said. "One is punishment. The other is alignment." He looked around the apartment. Sparse, intentional. "You seem fine," he said. "I am," I replied. He swallowed. "Dad isn't." "I know," I said. He hesitated. "He thinks you hate him." I met his eyes. "I don't hate him." "Then why?" "Because hate would mean I'm still orbiting him," I said. "I'm not." That landed. Matthew nodded slowly. "I don't know how to talk to you anymore." "You don't have to," I said. "That's allowed." He left without hugging me. That night, I didn't feel sad. I felt accurate. At work, I announced a new internal program, a founder fellowship for overlooked entrepreneurs in regional supply chains. Modest funding, serious mentorship. No press. We opened applications quietly. Within a week, over 100 submissions arrived. Stories that echoed pieces of mine. Different details, same pattern. People building, despite being dismissed early. I reviewed every one. Not out of obligation, out of recognition. Samantha noticed. "You're giving away power," she said lightly. "No," I replied. "I'm distributing it." She smiled. "That's the difference." The last family-related development came through Mark. "Your parents' attorney asked if you'd consider a global settlement," he said. I laughed once. "About what?" "Everything," he replied. I thought about it for a moment. "No," I said. "There's nothing left to settle." "Understood," he replied. "I'll close the door." He did. December arrived without ceremony. No invitations, no expectations, no last-minute attempts to rewrite the year. I spent Christmas with friends. Chosen family. No speeches, no hierarchies. I slept well. On New Year's Eve, I went back to Walter's house one last time before the keys transferred. I walked through each room slowly. Not nostalgic, intentional. In the kitchen, I paused. I thought about the girl who learned to be quiet so adults wouldn't notice how alone she was. She didn't disappear. She waited. And now, she didn't need to anymore. I locked the door and handed the keys to the realtor the next morning. As I drove away, I didn't look back. Not because it didn't matter, because it finally did, without hurting. The final truth settled gently, without resistance. Revenge didn't heal me. Self-respect did. And the distance I chose wasn't abandonment. It was adulthood. The last chapter wouldn't be about reconciliation or closure. It would be about what comes next, when you stop measuring your life against the people who left, and how choosing yourself consistently and without drama becomes the quietest kind of justice. The year turned without asking permission. No countdowns, no resolutions written to impress anyone. Just a calendar page, flipping quietly, while I stood exactly where I meant to be. Northline didn't surge. It settled. We closed the first quarter ahead of plan, not because we pushed harder, but because nothing leaked anymore. No emotional drain, no strategic noise, no energy spent explaining my right to exist in rooms I had already earned. That kind of efficiency compounds. I spent more time mentoring founders through the fellowship program. Not inspirational speeches, real conversations, balance sheets, hiring mistakes, the cost of underpricing yourself because you learned early that being wanted felt safer than being paid. One afternoon, a founder named Isabel Moreno, 32, asked me a question that stopped me. How did you know when to stop hoping they'd change? I didn't answer right away. You don't, I said finally. You stop organizing your life around the hope. She nodded. Understood. That night, I walked home instead of driving. The city felt ordinary, alive. People going somewhere without knowing my name or my history. I liked that. My parents didn't reach out again. I heard about my father's surgery through a cousin. Successful, routine. No request passed along. No invitation implied. I felt concern. Human, brief, contained. It didn't pull me backward. Matthew sent a postcard from Oregon. No return address. Just a picture of trees and one sentence written carefully. I'm trying to do things differently. I placed it in a drawer with the letter from my mother. Not trophies. Not wounds. Artifacts. At work, we held a leadership retreat. Small group. No facilitators. No trust exercises. I told them one thing I hadn't said out loud before. I won't ask you to choose loyalty over truth. If those ever conflict, choose truth. No one looked surprised. That was how I knew I'd built the right room. The last legal loose end closed in April. Mark called to confirm final filings were complete. No pending claims. No shadows left to chase. You're clean, he said. I always was, I replied. He laughed. You know what I mean. I do, I said. And thank you. On a quiet Saturday, I visited Walter's grave for the first time since the hearing. No flowers, no speech. I stood there and said one sentence out loud. I used it well. That was enough. Driving back, I realized something I hadn't planned for. I wasn't angry anymore. Not suppressed anger. Not managed anger. Gone. Anger had been a tool once, a way to stay alert, to stay sharp, but it wasn't needed now. What replaced it wasn't forgiveness. It was ownership of my time, my choices, my silence. The final shift came unexpectedly. A journalist emailed asking if I'd be open to writing a personal essay about family, power, and independence. Not an exposé, not a profile, a reflection. I declined. Not because I was afraid, because I didn't need witnesses anymore. My story wasn't unfinished. It was just private now. If you're listening to this and something in you feels steadier instead of louder, that's not an accident. Like the story if it spoke to you. Subscribe if you want more stories about choosing yourself without turning bitter. And if you feel ready, leave a comment about the moment you stopped waiting for permission. Here's what I know now. Being left behind doesn't make you weak. It teaches you how to build without applause. Inheritance isn't just money. It's the beliefs you keep and the ones you refuse. And revenge doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like peace that no one can access but you. I didn't win against my family. I outgrew the version of myself that needed them to see me. Northline continues to grow. Quietly, intentionally, on its own terms. So do I. And nothing I've built requires anyone else's approval to stand.